Hey everybody, I thought I would just make a video about all the books that I read in January and the things that I plan to read in February. It is already the middle of February, so this is not the best time to make a video like that, but I had told myself that I thought it'd be fun to do that on this second channel, so even though I'm behind for reasons that we can explore in a moment, that I just go ahead and make the video, and then maybe in the months to come, try to actually get it out around the first of the month. So, already, all of my big plans for 2025 have crumbled. I had said I was going to read 100 books in 2025, and I had also given you the list in a last video, and my sort of best books of 2024. I also said all the books that I wanted to read, and those books have kind of almost all been pushed by the wayside. Not all of them. And let's talk about why some of those, got sort of pushed aside. One is that I tried reading some of them and realized I didn't want to read them. And the books that are in that category would be the Expanse books. So I decided that I was going to read the Expanse as sort of my fun, escapist science fiction. That was my idea. And it helped that I already own them. And, I'm on sort of a no-buy kind of thing right now where I'm not buying new books in 2025, at least not for pleasure. And I started reading the Expanse books, and I bounced off the first one within a couple of pages. I won't say anything about the quality of the book because I haven't read it, and it wouldn't really be a meaningful criticism or comparison. What I can say, though, is that I just very clearly wanted something else, and I wasn't going to get it, I thought. I'm not opposed to revisiting them one day, but just right now that's not what I'm looking for. And I have decided to become a little bit more liberal when it comes to setting books aside that aren't speaking to me right now, instead of really giving them a chance. I used to try to maybe always get about a quarter of the way through before I made my decision. But now, if I'm not feeling a book on the first couple of pages, I'll set it aside and maybe try it again in the future. The Expanse seems to check a lot of boxes for me. Big science fiction, space opera, multiple characters in what is kind of an interesting political setting. It sounds kind of cool, but it's just not what I'm looking for right now. And I think the reason for that, honestly, is that I just feel so excited about some other stuff that I'm reading. And I just wanted, when I started reading The Expanse, I just wanted to go read the stuff that was making me excited. So I'm following my heart, everybody. Also, though, I had to set aside a lot of the discretionary reading because I'm working on some projects, including a book project. Hopefully, I will have some announcements soon. But the book projects are just taking up more time. That means a little bit less time to read, but it also means my reading needs to be a little more directed and focused on the things that I'm writing about. So the plans are in flux right now. But let's talk about what I did manage to read and what I'm reading next. So the first book that I read in January was Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a post-apocalyptic science fiction novel, features a robotic main character. He's a valet or a butler to a very wealthy and privileged person in this society. A society, though, that is basically crumbled. And the story follows the valet as he kind of ends up exploring this post-apocalyptic world and searches for meaning. That's the easiest description I think I can give without getting into too many spoilers. This book probably works really well for people who are fans of Murderbot. I didn't like the first Murderbot book and knew that I wasn't going to go and read it. So it scratched some itches for me. I thought it was funny at times. I liked the themes. I just really didn't feel like the book earned its length. This is a new criticism that I'm raising against a lot of books. A lot of science fiction and fantasy books have been told that they need to be long in order to do great world building, or to really immerse you in the setting. And I think that if you look at the history of the genre, that is not true. And that, in fact, a lot of these writers are relying on padding. And they are not being edited enough. I think actually this is my big criticism of a lot of literature, especially in fantasy and science fiction, is that they are not being edited enough at all. And they need much stronger editorial hands or people to put page limits on some of these books and say, you know what, you get 300 pages for this story. It's not a 500-page book. I'd like to see a little bit more of that. Maybe not quite so ruthless, But I did think Tchaikovsky was someone who can write a good book. I like Children of Time, but I feel like with Service Model, he was allowed to run a little too free at the end. All the themes that I wanted to explore were explored 3/4 of the way in. And so the last quarter just felt almost pointless. And it was supposed to be this big reveal or big impact, but I had already had all the thoughts. He had already set them up so well that I had drawn the conclusions for myself. So I just didn't feel any need so I didn't feel any sense of fulfillment at the end of the book. I was still early on in the year tracking stuff on the story graph, and I think I rated this like 3 stars. I did not do that for the majority of the books that I'm going to talk about today because I've already fallen behind using that website, and I probably am just going to give up and not talk about it, and just do everything in my notebook and talk about it in videos like I actually enjoy doing. The next book that I read was Borges, Ficciones. I read this right at the beginning of the year. Absolutely loved it. Already have mentioned on this channel, I think in my very first video of 2025 over on this little channel, that I loved it. I adored it. I want to read more Borges, but I'm not buying new books. And some people pointed out, like, you could just go to the library. And I actually have several really good libraries near me. And so if I want to read more Borges soon, if I have time, I will be going to the library and picking up more Borges, because Ficciones was a masterpiece. Easily it very well might be the best book that I read last month. One or two others might compete, but I thought it was wonderful, magical, terrific. Every story is great. Some are clearly better than others, but none of the stories in that collection are bad. And if you want to talk about someone who is incredibly effective and economical in their writing, it's Borges. It was also one of the few cases where I've ever felt genuinely sad that I am not reading an author in the original language. It made me want to learn Spanish just to read Borges. Maybe I should do that when I finally have some time. I went on a little bit of a Terry Pratchett binge at the end of last year and ended up reading one more Terry Pratchett book in January, and that was Thief of Time. I think that Thief of Time is one of the weaker Discworld novels that I've read. I've read the vast majority of them at this point. And considering that I had just read The Truth, which I think is pretty good, and Hogfather, which I think is clearly one of the best Discworld novels, Thief of Time just kind of felt tacked on, which can happen with Pratchett a bit, because he wrote so many of those Discworld novels. However, I wouldn't want to say that any of them so far have been bad. I don't think I've ever read a Discworld novel that I thought was just bad. So that's good. And if you're looking for like just that fun escapism, Pratchett is my go-to, and he could be really good for you. I also finished The Human Condition by Hannah Arendt. That was a read-along that I ran on my Substack starting at the end of November and then going all the way into January. I ended up having a lot of criticisms of the book, but the great thing about a book like that is that just because you come away with criticisms of the ideas doesn't mean you necessarily dislike the book. It's also frustratingly written in a few places, but the way that it made me think and the discussions it led me to have with some of my subscribers on Substack ended up being really great, and really helped me think through a couple of issues about our relationship to technology and to work that I have been trying to explore on my own. And so that, very good. I revisited Emily Herring's Herald of a Restless World because I did an interview with her on my Substack as well. That is her biography of the philosopher Henri Bergson. And as biographies go, really lively, pretty casual read compared to like the Marx biography that I featured in a recent video. But I thought it was really nice, and it made me feel deeply about Bergson, and also like I was angry when I read about things about Bertrand Russell and his treatment of Bergson, which I thought was kind of a powerful emotion. I don't often feel those kinds of emotions when I'm reading biographies. It also was just interesting to see a look into late 19th century, early 20th century Parisian academic culture. So foreign to me as an American former academic. So just seeing that with these very, very strong institutions with like these really heavy norms, kind of cool to glimpse into there. But also you find out things like Proust was in Bergson's wedding because he was like a cousin by marriage. Finding out that Proust and Bergson were connected in this way, but also didn't really collaborate or talk all that much. Bergson, I guess, didn't find him that impressive. They also both were really reclusive, liked to work at night. All sorts of factors kept them apart from collaborating or working together. But the connection was an interesting one to discover. And just revisiting that book has been really good. I read it last year, revisited this time, and then had a great conversation with Dr. Emily Herring just about her book and about the life of Bergson and about some of his philosophical ideas like durée. And if you want to read that, if you want to listen to that interview, I'll link it down below, and you can hear me butcher all of the French, and then Emily do a great job of it. I read The Right to Oblivion by Lowry Presley, which is about the philosophy of privacy and the right to privacy, and about the relationship between privacy and living a meaningful life. Presley is also going to be someone that I interview, I think, on the Substack soon. So I'm still working through my thoughts, and I'll have to revisit the book one more time before that interview. But the right to privacy is something that I've had a lot of passion about for a long time, but never knew how to make sense of it philosophically. And I'm not totally sold on everything that Presley puts forward as like what constitutes the right to privacy and where do we draw the boundaries. But I'm glad somebody is doing that kind of philosophical work. So highly recommend that book. As a fantasy novel, I read Witchy Eye by DJ Butler. I actually have like kind of a personal connection to DJ Butler. We are friends of a sort, or associates, I would say. I know him. And we are friendly, let's put it that way. And we have some mutual friends, and I had been connected to him, and I finally wanted to read some of his fiction. I had picked it up a couple of months ago, read a bit of it, thought it was good, but knew I would get around to it later. But I really liked it. I thought this was a really interesting take on epic fantasy. It's set in the United States in the New World, but in an alternate history. There's an empire. Oliver Cromwell is a necromancer. There are these people who are descended from Adam's first wife. And so they're sometimes called like the Serpent-born or the Firstborn or the Ophidians, I believe. And it's just a really interesting twist on things. There's lots of stuff with languages, including native and indigenous languages in the United States. I happen to know that DJ Butler actually will actually go and research those things to put them into his books. I thought that was good. Story felt like a fairly kind of common fantasy story in that regard. And really what's doing a lot of the work for me there is the world building. And if you're someone who really likes that kind of style in your fantasy books, you want to read it mostly for the world. Butler's book is pretty rock solid. I can mention one other thing that I finished, because I finished it so early in February, I guess. And that was The Honourable Schoolboy by John le Carré. It's my third John le Carré novel. I liked this more than I liked Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, less than I liked The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. But as with only a few authors, so far I have been nothing but impressed. I'm also really impressed by his versatility. Let's draw a weird comparison, talk about Pratchett, since that was someone I've read a lot of and just read a little bit of him recently. Pratchett has different stories that he tells within the Discworld books, but Pratchett does feel a little one note for me. He basically has his version of comic mixed with his, dash of sincerity. Occasionally he is able to break out of that. And I think that some of the City Watch books, in particular something like Night Watch, a little bit of Thud, and then the one with the goblin who ends up singing, the name is escaping me right now. Those books end up doing more. But many of, and like Reaper Man. So, okay, maybe I'm being a little unfair to Pratchett here. He still, I don't think of him as a very versatile writer. And even though John le Carré is just continuing to write spy novels that are all mostly about the circus, about British intelligence at a time that he would have been most familiar with it, each one of them like stylistically feels very different. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is so tightly written and is really a thriller. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy has whole scenes where George Smiley, the main character, is just sitting at a desk reading paperwork, and he'll do it for 20 pages, and it's gripping. It's completely gripping. And then there's a bit more of a raucous element to the Honourable Schoolboy that I thought just worked so well. John le Carré is quickly becoming one of my favorite writers. I feel like the scales have fallen from my eyes. I just am so in love with reading le Carré. And I will probably try to average 2 le Carré novels a month for the rest of the year. I'm also reading, so currently now I am reading another le Carré novel. I'm reading Smiley's People. I'm going to finish the Carla trilogy. I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks anymore, but I had the audiobook already of Titanium Noir by Nick Harkaway, who is John le Carré's son, and liking that enough. I think it's fine. I don't think... I've heard really good things about his book that he wrote about Carla in the Smiley kind of universe, which scared me at first, because you hear about a son who writes in his famous father's literary universe, and you just think, oh no, that's going to go terribly wrong. But I think I've heard good things about Nick Harkaway's stuff there, so I will read that. But I don't love Titanium Noir so far, but I still will probably read that and Nomen in the near future, though I don't think I'll get to Nomen in February. There's another novel, though, that I forgot that I need to mention, which is Cubafruit by Alexander Sorando. This is a self-published novel. It is unfortunately only available via Kindle. Alexander Sorando has a YouTube channel, a booktube channel, and he has talked about lots of books, and then he went off and he wrote a novel. He worked on it for years. He's documented this on his Substack. He had an agent. His agent kept submitting the book, thinking it was really good. They would get back from they would get a letter back from editors that would talk about how good this book was, and it would be really effusive. And then they would say, but unfortunately, we can't publish this. And I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, if I had to speculate, I think it's because it's like a magical realist thriller. That's the way I would describe this book. And so it's violent at times, graphic, obscene, but also then very playful. And of course, dealing with a lot of these kind of recurring tropes of magical realism. And it's just a little bit hard to place like where the novel is going to fit. So an editor who's a little too business minded might look at a book like Cubafruit and think, who's going to buy it? Like, what shelf do I put it on? How do I, and they're not thinking, by the way, what customer's going to buy it necessarily. They're thinking about what bookseller or what vendors are going to buy it, because there's a middleman in that process. So for Alexander, I think that basically he got screwed by the system. And I've mentioned this several times on my Substack, and now I'll mention it here, that I just think this novel's worth reading, and it's only $3.99. You can get a Kindle copy. You should immediately, by the way, then use a program like Caliber and download it and strip it of its DRM so you actually own the thing that you buy. And that's just my anti-Amazon stuff coming out again. But you should read the book. You should read Cubafruit, because it's thrilling and it's great, and it's sad that this didn't get a proper publication. I think he's still accomplished something by putting it out into the world, so I say good for him. It deserves more readers, though. I think it right now has one, last time I checked, it had 1 review on Amazon, and I would like to see it have way more reviews. And I suspect that if it gets way more reviews, it will get lots of 4 and 5 stars. And it's a book that I know he cares about, and I know he's proud of, and he should be proud of it. So let's talk about some things that I am going to be reading. I happen to have this one nearby, but I am going to be reading The Dispossessed. I have started it again, and that is because I am doing a read-along on my Substack. If you want to join me, by the way, those are always free. My Substack does have a paid component, but I do the read-alongs for free, so that way anybody who wants to kind of join my book club can join and read the books with me. Basically what I do is I put out a schedule. We read maybe 60 to 90 pages a week. Then we talk about it in the comments of my Substack. I put out a post, people talk about it. Paid subscribers get a little bit extra. You'd see that if you checked out the newsletter, but you could do it all for free. I'm not doing a good job selling myself here, right? Because I'm saying you get the bulk of the value if you get a free subscription, and that's the way that I like to do things. Revisiting The Dispossessed is just always great for me, though. It's my favorite science fiction novel. I used to say by a mile. I would say now it's just my favorite science fiction novel. There are a few that are close to The Dispossessed, but I love this book, and I'm glad to be reading it. I don't know when I'm going to read the The sequel to Witchy Eye probably will be a little while. Enjoyed those books enough. I enjoyed the first one enough that I will want to read more of it, but I've just got so much other stuff on my plate. So let me grab a couple of the books and show you that are on my research pile, and my research pile for my book project. So there is a huge number of books that I plan to read for my book, and it would be tedious to just go through all of them. But the 3 that I want to get through this month are The Study, which is the inner life of Renaissance libraries, and it's about building yourself a study, the history of it, and its sort of role in the life of the mind. Thinking about how your environment, including your built environment, actually affects how you think and what you think about. That is just a beautiful book. I'm reading another Neil Postman book, which is Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology. If you are familiar with my stuff about technology over on my main channel, probably not a surprise that I want to read more Postman, and that if I were writing a book, I would need to read Postman as a big reference. Amusing Ourselves to Death is great, and it's a classic, but Technopoly might be more relevant for the stuff that I'm writing. And then also The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper. This is a sort of historical look at how people have used notebooks in the intellectual life, or the life of the mind. Which I can't say a ton about the project yet. Well, I don't know what I am and I'm not allowed to say because I haven't asked anybody. But very broadly, the topic is the life of the mind. So anything that has to do with those topics, I'm going to be touching. And then I think, aside from reading The Dispossessed, I'm reading Plotinus's Enneads, and I need to kind of finish that in the next 2 months because I gave myself 3 months to read it. And I'm sure that's going well and just slow. I should be writing a little bit more about that. But I think basically what I'm going to be doing for the rest of, I don't know, the next 6 months or so, is I'm writing this book project. I'm working on a fiction book project too, but no word about that. That's just something I'm working on for fun. Is that I'll probably do my research writing, and I'll do some of the writing I do for Substack, I think what I'll just be doing then, though, for the next 6 months is I'll do my research writing, which is either for the book or for videos or for stuff I do on Substack. And then the stuff I read for fun, right now, I'm just going to be reading John le Carré. After that, I might just go and read a bunch of other spy novels. But I don't know of other spy novelists. I know of Ian Fleming. I want someone to tell me, who's the American John le Carré? Who are the inheritors of that tradition? I feel so lost in this new genre. I'm loving it, but I'm not nearly as familiar. I've got a really good grip on fantasy and science fiction. I've got a decent grip on the classics in the sense of I kind of know where I need to go. With the spy fiction, crime fiction, stuff like this, I don't know where I need to go, aside from maybe Agatha Christie. So anyway, those are some disconnected thoughts about projects and about what I've been reading and what I will be reading. I look forward to talking to you at the beginning of next month. And let me know down below what you've been reading.